that are not.
Welcome to EmpowerU, everyone. I'm Dan Reganold. When you come to these free sessions at EmpowerU, we just invite you to get educated, learn about new things, enjoy, have fun, and get engaged. Like tonight's session, it's a super important topic tonight we're going to be talking about, and that is the PPP loan forgiveness subject. Tonight you'll hear from Brad Wenstrup, Representative Brad Wenstrup, who was directly involved in a sponsor of the PPP legislation, and two great speakers, attorneys Chris Finney and Rebecca Heimlich, about how you can get your PPP loan forgiven. Just a couple introductions. We're not in EmpowerU due to COVID, so I just wanted to introduce our team. We've got Betty Overstreet, our executive director, Jill Google, our operations manager, Bill Roll, our treasurer, and our great producer, Jay Grunke. For those of you who are new, welcome here to EmpowerU. We're going to begin our 20th season, our 20th episode of EmpowerU, September 22nd, and we normally have about 20 classes a semester. I hope you'll join us. Every class of EmpowerU, we do a giveaway. And since we don't have baseball this year, I thought it might be kind of fun to do a baseball giveaway. And when I was a kid, I was just reading biographies about baseball players. Lou Gehrig was one of my favorite, the Iron Horse, and the incredible 1927 New York Yankees. At the age of 24, Gehrig decided to tell the remarkable story of his life in a series of syndicated columns which were lost, but have just been published as a book. So if you're a baseball fan and you want a chance to win the Lou Gehrig book tonight, just go to the bottom of your screen. You'll see a Q&A tab, and just jot me your email address and we'll pick a winner at the end of tonight. Same thing about your questions about PPP loan forgiveness, and many of you have already sent me a few. Jot those questions and start jotting them now. At EmpowerU, we always try to have a little suggested reading. The one I'm going to propose for tonight that's linked on empoweruohio.org is Dan Henniger's new article called America's New Nihilism. This new progressive nihilism says the answer to inner city crime is decriminalization. And the new nihilism minimizes this week's assault on private property because it's replaceable. He's always a good read. If you're looking for something good to read, go to Dan Henniger's piece on empoweruohio.org. Tonight's class, if somebody you know has a PPP loan and they missed it, you can watch a replay tomorrow after 4 o'clock. Just go to empoweruohio.org, look for the link for the class, and rewatch it if you missed something, or refer it to a friend. So we've got a big class coming up Thursday night, and we're talking about COVID-19, what we know, what we don't know, and the policy implications. And I've got a few thoughts about some things that have happened over the last week or two. We had a great class planned this semester called Political Correctness. And we were going to talk about a few tips on what to say to people you were talking to. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that Thursday night. I hope you'll join us. We've got Mike Wilson joining us Thursday night. And for those of you on Facebook that have been following Mike and reading his long publications about COVID-19, he's so data-driven and analytic. It's so interesting. He'll be joining us Thursday night as we reopen EmpowerU Studio to 40 people. I think we're already sold out for Thursday night, so please don't come, but we'll be distancing and being safe, but you can watch the session on live. We'd love to have you join. And joining us that night will be Dr. Rob Bullis, who has never been to EmpowerU, but he'll be talking about medicine, the hospitals, and the disease itself. It'll be great to be back to EmpowerU Studio. So many of you have signed up for tonight's class, and as a business owner, I just feel a lot of electricity in the room, a big crowd. You know, we're the ones that are going to make this happen. It's exciting. We can do it. So let's begin with tonight's guest. So tonight's guest, we've got Chris Finney, is a licensed attorney in Ohio, Kentucky, and the District of Columbia, as well as a licensed Ohio real estate insurance agent. Chris was Ohio Lawyer of the Year in 1998 at the age of 36. He's the owner of the Finney Law Firm, which brings together more than 30 years of experience as a real estate attorney. And Chris has knitted together the attorneys of the Finney Law Firm with the title professionals and attorneys at Ivy Point Title. One of Chris's claim to fame is winning a Supreme Court decision. 9-0, and he was instrumental in our first PPP class we had, which was the most number of people we've ever had in an EmpowerU class. So Chris, welcome to EmpowerU. We're glad to have you back.
I got to get my microphone turned back on, but Dan, it's an honor to be here, and can't thank you enough for continuously organizing this. Is this, how many years of EmpowerU is this?
We'll be entering our 20th semester, so almost 10 years.
That's what I thought. So we're going to have a big 10-year anniversary when we can all get together again?
We will. We try to have one once a year, and Congressman Winstrup, who we're so glad to have tonight, joined us a few years back and was our great speaker, so it'll be fun.
Well, thank you. If I can just say a few, is this my time to say a few words, Dan? Okay. Well, the heavy lifting tonight, first of all, is going to be done by Dr. Winstrup, and you're going to do the proper introduction of him, but I can't thank him enough for really everything he's done in Congress. He's one of the few honest men up there in Washington, and I think it's a lonely, difficult job. I can see, honestly, Doctor, you look young and vibrant, but sometimes I see the strain on your face of the challenges that you have to continue to be honorable and hardworking and keep your chin up in a difficult environment up there. So I want to express my appreciation for that, and also just as your great work as a congressman, but also for helping tonight as well, and what you've done on the PPP program, which is important to so many small businesses. And then I want to mention, and Dan again is going to do the introductions, but Rebecca Heimlich has joined our firm in January. And one of the first projects she did out of the gate was tackle PPP and fully understanding this. And I got to tell you, there's accounting firms and law firms nationwide that have tried to stay on top of this and struggled with it. And I don't think there's anybody who knows more about it. She's read every word in every statute and regulation. She understands it inside and out, and it's been a great showcase for her and the new practice group that she has made for our firm, which is called Small Business Solutions. And if you do need legal assistance on any kind of particular problem that you have, regulatory or litigation or otherwise, Rebecca is going to be a huge resource to helping you with that. But I'm so proud of her and what she has done for our firm and for our clients with the PPP. And then finally, it's been an honor to be of help to so many people. Doctor, the reason that this was the biggest class ever for EmpowerU, which I think, Jay, was something like 360 people or something the first time through, is because of the problems that COVID caused and the government caused with all the shutdowns. And the money was desperately needed for so many hardworking entrepreneurial people, and it came in just the right place and just the right time. And it was a wonderful and needed program, but we had people just beating down the door for that first class, and even for this one tonight. And it's been of great value. So, and then finally, I want to thank Dan. Dan, are we still promoting Fill the Truck, or is that off the table?
We're not right now.
We're not right now. Well, Dan has a charity. First of all, I want to then solicit contributions for EmpowerU. Dan does so much of this out of his own pocket, and it's amazing. He's built a studio. He pays for the AV. He does all the promotions. He devotes countless hours to this, what obviously has become a passion for you to do this. And it's so well done and consistently professional. The programming is excellent. Your people that you put together are outstanding. Jay has done a good job with all this. And so if you want to give something, I strongly recommend you go online. Can we donate online to EmpowerU, Dan?
No.
No. So send him a check at the Frame USA for EmpowerU.
Yeah, the address will be at the end. We can normally, but our webinars, we're not quite able to do it on Zoom yet. We're working with our
But if you go to the EmpowerU website, is there a donation button?
Yeah, you can donate on there.
Yeah,
great.
so help him out. And also, obviously, help Dr. Winstrup out. He's got a race this fall, and we want him to move up in House leadership as well. And I know that fundraising power helps, so we need to get behind him and be supportive of it. But anyway, Dan, I'm done talking. Rebecca's really going to do the heavy lifting tonight, and Dr. Winstrup, for what he's done legislatively, is going to tell us about the environment in Washington. So take it from here.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's just a real honor for me to introduce our guest, Representative Brad Winstrup, who been a speaker at EmpowerU before and was elected in 2012 to represent the people of Ohio's 2nd Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. He's been deeply involved in the PPP loan program to help businesses, and he brings experience, just so much experience. Army Reserve officer, Iraq War veteran, small business owner like us. We need somebody to help Congress tackle the economic and security mess that has faced us as a nation. In the 116th Congress, Brad serves on the House Committee on Ways and Means and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. He's previously spent 6 years on Armed Services and the Committee on Veterans Affairs. As a Cincinnati native, Brad graduated from St. X and the University of Cincinnati. He went on to earn a medical degree in Chicago as a pediatric physician, and after completing his surgical residency, he established a private practice in Cincinnati for 26 years. Brad and his wife, Monica, reside in Cincinnati with their children, Brad Jr. and Sophia. Brad will be joining us, and we're glad to have him tonight. Congressman Winthrop, welcome to EmpowerU.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Dan. It's good to see everybody. See some friends I haven't seen in a while because that goes with the job sometimes. They pull you away. And the talk of donations there, I didn't know if I was in church or in a classroom, but I appreciate it because it takes advocacy and it takes the ability to speak out on issues. And, another issue in somewhat the same vein, the effects of COVID-19, I hope we have a chance to talk about health savings accounts and flexible savings accounts and what we're trying to do to modify them considering the changes that took place in healthcare for several months. And, it's a challenging situation. As a doctor, I'm always in favor of prevention. And when you see something spreading like it has in so many other countries and it's coming to the United States, you saw what was going on in New York, it's always difficult to measure prevention. And part of prevention was, of course, shutting down or closing down a lot of things. But, the district that I represent, it runs from Cincinnati, Ohio to Portsmouth, Ohio. So, yeah, we have some of the urban problems. Obviously, the numbers for the virus were larger in the greater Cincinnati area. But you get out to some of the rural areas, and you have like Southern Ohio Medical Center. A couple of weeks ago, I checked with them. They didn't have any admissions for COVID, yet they prepared and shut down in the same way. And that's the same with a lot of the rural hospitals. Maybe one admission, they just weren't seeing the problem. Hard for people to understand why this is being done. And I did talk to the governor about trying to be a little forward thinking, and he does listen. He really has. But a lot of decisions I think should be made on a local basis. And I served on Cincinnati Board of Health, and I know when something like this happens, you've got to react, and you've got to have good data, though. And that was one of the problems that we had as a nation. I won't get into China. But as a result of all this, the err on the side of caution, I think we let too many other things go in healthcare in particular. But besides that, it really put a strain on our business. So what were we trying to do as Congress? What we were trying to do as Congress, especially at the very beginning, is say, look, we've got a problem. We've got to address a medical issue. We got to address an epidemic. But we also have to address what's happening to businesses and to people and to their jobs. And really, as the bills came out into phases, it was, I say it wasn't with a broad brush, it was done with a roller, and it was done fast. And there were a lot of things that went into it. And we knew there were going to be some glitches and some problems that we're going to have to address, and we're still working on some of those. But at the same time, I think that a lot has been accomplished to try and get people through. But whenever you're dealing with something that large, there's going to be hiccups and drawbacks. But one of the, as we started, we went into the medical side. We got to get more tests. We got to work on antivirals. I was out promoting that those that have had this disease, and I'll do it again right now, make the plug. If you've had COVID and you've recovered, you have antibodies that you can donate to help save another life. Keep that in mind. So there's a lot of positives going on with treatment. We saw the country rally. I hope in the future that the things that we need on the medical side, some medical supply chain, we've got that resolved, and that's not an issue. But one of the things that has been very successful and very popular was the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. And that was so popular that when we rolled it out with the idea of helping especially small businesses and nonprofits, was to get you through, to keep your company solvent and to keep your employees on the payroll. And that was the idea for these loans. So Congress initially authorized $349 billion in loans. It began on April 3rd, and by April 16th, it was out of money. April 24th, we authorized another $310 billion. to go towards that. We recognized that this was need. And the idea of these loans is with the potential for forgiveness on these loans, or if unable to be forgiven, then they'd be at very low interest. And so actually then you go to, going back in May, middle of May, we passed the first version of the PPP forgiveness applications. Now, Rebecca will probably talk about this as my guest, and she can go into more detail. I will tell her that I have supported a bill that will streamline the work involved with this. The paperwork involved with this is too much, and especially for the smaller loans. So what our letter talks about is if your loan is $350,000 or less, you have very streamlined paperwork when it comes to the forgiveness component of it. At the end of May, House passed House Resolution 7010, and that was the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act, because we were listening to a lot of people, listening to some of the problems that people were facing in their businesses as far as flexibility of the money that they were receiving and how it could be spent. So we made some changes. That was passed on June 3rd of 2020, and President signed it on June 5th. And they would release the new rules and forgiveness guidelines. And that's, I think, what has a lot of people concerned, is they don't want to get in trouble over this. They want to be able to succeed and cooperate with the intent of the program and pay back. But so what this bill does, increases the maximum maturity for these loans, which was 2 years under SBA regulations. We increase it to 5 years for loans made on or after the date of enactment of the bill, which would give borrowers more time to pay off the remaining loan balances. And if there are portions that are not forgiven because you didn't retain all your employees or whatever, it would be at a 1% interest rate, and for that unforgiven portion. We changed the forgiveness covered period from 8 weeks from the original date to the sooner of the two, which will either be 24 weeks or December 31st of 2020, giving people more time. We found that especially needed. If you're a business where there is absolutely no revenue coming in during this time, 8 weeks is not enough to get back on your feet and start to repay. So we changed the safe harbor deadline for employers who can't rehire their workers or find other similarly qualified employees to hire from June 30th of 2020 to December 31st of 2020, giving people more time. And again, you know, when this started, no one really knew how long this was going to go on. And from state to state, how long it's going on has really been varied. And so there needs to be this flexibility in place so that it can work across the country, especially when there's influence at the local level that can be negative to the bill that we originally wrote. The other thing that was included, we increased the cap on PPP forgiveness. Okay, the forgiveness that can be attributed to non-payroll costs. So we changed that from 25% to 40%, and that should be really helpful to a lot of businesses to have that flexibility. And the other thing is in this bill, it allowed PPP borrowers to defer employer payroll taxes even after obtaining PPP forgiveness. So we're just trying to give more flexibility. I don't want these programs to be punitive. I want them to be helpful, but we don't want them to be abused. And we want to make sure that there's not fraud. And we want to do the best that we can to make sure that the businesses that are getting this money are the businesses that need it. You know, can we learn a lot from this? Boy, I sure hope so. I would hope that in the future we can come up with ways, maybe similar to health savings accounts, where businesses, et cetera, can put money away, pre-tax dollars, and when there's an emergency, they can use that and keep themselves afloat. And maybe just like insurance, it should be something that's required to some degree of businesses to be ready for that particular situation, but obviously to make it so it's easier for them to do it. You know, we also, when you have a decision made on forgiveness of your loan, the bank needs to be paid, and that it will be by the government. And that has to be done to the bank in less than 60 days. So a few more things to share with you. If the lender determines that the borrower is entitled to some or all of the applied forgiveness amount, then the lender must request the payment from the Small Business Administration. So that's a key point. The lender must request the payment from the Small Business Association. And the SBA is required to review all loans in excess of $2 million following their submission of the application. The SBA will pay the lender with interest. Borrowers must repay any amount not forgiven within the PPP loan's 2-year maturity period, or 5 years if you're falling under that portion of the loan with the newer bill. Again, I signed on to a bill with Representative Barr from Kentucky that we found that the paperwork involved with seeking the forgiveness is extremely cumbersome and not appropriate, I don't think, for what we're trying to do here. And hopefully we'll get some recognition of that and bring that down, especially for the smaller loans. Because when you get into that and you have got so much to do to just get this all taken care of, it's really cumbersome when really you're just trying to restart your business. So I'll leave it at that. I think that, I want to tell people that if you have questions going forward on this bill, which indeed you might, because there's just been so many things and so many changes, please feel free to call my office. The number is 513-474-7777, and we will try to assist you, as we always try to do with anything involving the federal government and our agencies, as best we can, recognizing it's pretty challenging to get through this. But I do have to say, I know there's been glitches. I know it's been very anxiety-ridden for a lot of people and will continue to be for some time. But I have to say, I was impressed really with how quickly, relatively quickly, a lot of this was set up. Money got out to people compared to, say, the beginning, the rollout of Obamacare, for example. I think our agencies really did a pretty good job. They admit they didn't bat 1,000, but really tried to correct any problems that they had. And got this involved all of America and involved all of America pretty quickly. So hopefully we're getting you there, and we'll continue to help you get there.
Congressman, just a question or two.
Yeah.
Because I know you're in the middle of another meeting you're attending. So how do you feel about the whole PPP? Having been through that whole thing, do you feel pretty good about how it really ended up, though?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't like that we're in a situation that we are doling out money that we really don't have. That I can't deny. But at the same time, we've never been through something like this. It seems to me that as a government or a business, there are times of crises when you borrow. The question is, as we reopen, are we going to start looking at how we pay some of this back? Yeah, I do think, no, there's no doubt. I think the premise has been very good. And I get many, many calls, especially for the changes that we fought for over time, for example, from restaurant owners, et cetera. That has been very key to them. And they've been real pleased with how hard we've worked to make these changes. Not that everything rolled out perfectly. I get that. And then, we also, I really want to give some credit to the lenders. We put a lot of responsibility on lenders. What we found is that the smaller banks were doing a better job than the larger banks. Maybe that's because of sheer volume. Maybe it's about the way they were doing it. From what I've heard anecdotally, Dan, on that front, is the smaller banks were kind of doing things just by hand, right? They're doing the old-fashioned way, getting it done, and other people relying on software that was, running into problems. So, there's definitely always room for the after-action review and what could have been better. There's no doubt about it. And we're going to continue to look at that and continue to hear from people on how we could do things better. At the same time, we would like to see this rolled out, implemented, and legitimately say, that's enough. We're back on our feet, or we're getting back on our feet. And if there's other areas, again, with this, these weren't bad business decisions made by people. This was an unfortunate thing thrust upon business owners. And that's a problem. And, again, on the healthcare side, there were many places I thought could stay open. We had a candle factory in Highland County. I've been in there. They don't work side by side, and the ones that do can certainly be spread out. We fought to get them just to be able to keep putting out their supply. Interesting to know that when there's a national crisis, candles are in high demand, right? I mean, people took this the same way you would a hurricane or tornado or power outage of some other type.
And candles, I guess. Hey,
Yeah.
on the requirement for the less paperwork for the loans under 350,000, is that through, or is that just, does that have to be? Is that
No,
through?
that's something we're pushing for.
Okay.
Yeah, that is not through. You know, unfortunately, Nancy Pelosi has decided that we don't need to be in DC. She's decided on proxy voting, which is, you know, I think it's unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional. We do, and we're taking them to court on it, which I don't know what'll happen, because there's a good chance we're going to win that. I don't know what happens to those votes. But at the same time, as Republicans, we are all ready to be in DC, because things like you're talking about with the 350, believe me, that can get done a whole lot faster if we are all there.
It's so
and talking
important.
about it,
Yeah,
and
it's so
talking
important.
about it, and
Yeah.
getting that buzz going. Yeah.
We're going to let you get back to your meeting. Thanks so much, Congressman Winstrup, for joining us. Thanks for your input on the PPP. We all greatly appreciate it. And have a great rest of your night.
All right. Thanks, you too. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you tuning in. God bless.
Thanks, Doc. We appreciate it.
You bet. Good night. Thanks.
Well, we're going to move and have Rebecca Heimlich join us tonight. We're so glad to have her join us. And gosh, I'd say she has to be one of the foremost experts of the PPP protection plan, really across the greater Cincinnati area. And Rebecca is an attorney at the Finney Law Firm, very transparent, very willing to answer your question. If it doesn't get answered tonight, we'll try to give you her email address at the end. Start your questions at the Q&A button. Rebecca's got some kind of fixed comments she wants to make about the forgiveness, and then we're gonna hit the questions hard. So Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Sure, thank you. Let me share my screen and get the PowerPoint up so we can get going. There we go. So I was very happy to hear Representative Winstrup say that they're going to try to make this less complex and make the paperwork less difficult, less paperwork, because one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight is that the calculations, the paperwork, it is burdensome. And so I'm going to try to give general overviews that make sense. I know Congressman Winstrup gave a terrific overview of the Paycheck Protection Program, so there are some slides that I'll be able to skip or just skim over. But my goal is to get through this in about 20 minutes so that we can get to your questions.
Great.
There we go. Quickly though, at the beginning, we always have to give a disclaimer, just essentially that this webinar doesn't create an attorney-client relationship. If you do want to engage us to answer your questions on your particular situation, we are certainly happy to do that. You can give us a call and we will give you all of our contact information at the end. So what we're going to cover, we're going to give just it's going to be very quick, the overview, because Congressman Winstrup did such a great job. PPP forgiveness. There has been, as you know, new guidance and new legislation. There's some questions that has created. We're going to talk a little bit about the need certification, because that became a big issue when we started hearing that there were some publicly traded companies and large nonprofits that received the PPP. And then we're going to go through the calculation in general and sort of the different elements of the calculation that you see there. And that's where we get into the weeds a little bit. And I have put a lot more detail into the PowerPoint than I'm going to likely go over tonight so that we can get through this and get to your questions. Dan, I'm assuming that you'll be able to post that PowerPoint so that people can see the detail after this is over. Okay, great.
EmpowerUohio.org tomorrow.
Terrific. So just in general, and the Congressman already went over this, but there are funds left. If you have not applied for a PPP loan, there's over $100 billion left. When the program first came out, through the first phase, the money went very fast. The $349 billion went in a couple weeks. The $310 billion that was passed in the end of April, people started being concerned about whether they were going to be able to use the money in a way that would be forgivable. And so there is a significant amount of money left. What we're hoping to see is now that the Flexibility Act has been passed, that potentially people will feel more comfortable now applying for the loans, and we'll see more of that. So some of the elements of it, as you know, no cost to apply, no personal guarantee, and you're going to apply to your bank. So that's all I'm going to give you at this point. It's for small businesses, it's for independent contractors, it's for self-employed, certain nonprofits. And if you think you're interested in applying, we're certainly able to answer questions for you, and as well as your bank is who you'll need to contact. This is just a brief summary of how much funding has gone out so far, what the loan count is. What I'll tell you is that when there started being news about some of the larger companies, publicly traded companies, Harvard, Potbelly getting the money, there was a bit of backlash on the program, and the SBA and the Treasury came out very quickly and tried to resolve that. And a lot of that money has actually been paid back. So what you're seeing now down here, what you're seeing, the white portion, the images, is off of a summary that the SBA put out on the 7th, and it's numbers through the 6th of this month. And what you see is this overall average loan size. We get updates every couple weeks. That number has been going down. So the emphasis has been on trying to get these dollars out to smaller businesses, and it seems that that is definitely the way that it's trending. So all I'll say about this is, because the congressman already went over the PPP Flexibility Act and the elements of it, and they're here to read if you would like. There was an application that came out that was very helpful, although it is very complicated. There was a new interim final rule that came out a couple days after that. That's essentially the regulations that matched up with the application. The challenge is the application at this point has not been updated to match the new legislation. So that has created some questions as to how they're going to have to issue a new application that shows how this new Flexibility Act and the elements in it and the things that have changed, how that is going to impact exactly the calculations. But we can try to extrapolate based on what we know, and I will tell you when I get to those points and we don't know, but I'll tell you what I think it's likely going to be. But in some cases, what you think it's going to be may not be what it is. And as we've gone through this process, and I agree with the congressman that, this was something that needed to be done quickly, and it's something that everyone has tried, the lenders and the SBA and the Treasury and Congress has tried really hard to get done quickly, and they have. But that has meant that we have had some conflicting guidance, some changing rules, and I anticipate that we're going to continue seeing that. So I want to talk a little bit about the need certification, because this was such a big issue after we started hearing about some of the larger loans that went out to public traded companies. When that happened, the SBA pretty quickly said, hey, when you apply for your PPP loan, one of the many certifications that you had to make, in good faith, you had to say that current economic uncertainty makes the loan request necessary to support your ongoing operations. And what the SBA said was, we're actually serious about that. And if you cannot show in good faith that it was necessary to support ongoing operations, then we can come after you for civil and criminal penalties. After that, they issued some safe harbors where if you didn't believe that you could show that you made that in good faith, you could pay it back by certain dates, and that date kept changing. The last date was the 18th of May. But then the most helpful guidance for most businesses that came out in FAQ question 46 was that if you and your affiliates put together received less than $2 million in PPP funds, then you will be assumed to have made that certification in good faith. Now, if you received over $2 million, they're going to look at you. But and you're past the deadline for the safe harbor. However, the guidance that they're still saying is if we find that you didn't make it in good faith, but you pay it back immediately, we won't come after you. So all of that on the need certification is really what has stopped some of these larger companies from getting the funds that really didn't need them, as well as had made several of them pay the funding back. So now we're going to get into the calculation of forgiveness. And I have several steps here. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to tell you in general how this works. In general, and then we're going to go through each element of how each element's defined. In general, you're going to add together your qualifying payroll costs with your qualifying non-payroll costs. And then you're going to reduce that amount by any reduction that you have to have because you either reduced compensation of employees or you reduced your full-time employees and you didn't meet the safe harbor. You weren't able to get those back up to the levels by now it's December 31st. And then everyone has heard that you have to spend at least, it was 75% on payroll. Now it's 60% on payroll. And the way that and I'll show you the actual form, the actual application when we get closer to the end. Essentially, they have you figure you look at your loan amount, you look at your modified total, which is essentially all of your eligible costs minus what you have to reduce if you reduced compensation or full-time employees. And then you also look at a calculation so that you end up meeting that 60% or 75% rule. And then you're going to take the lesser of those three. Now, one of the big questions for a long time had been, does the 75%, now the 60%, does it apply to the total loan amount or does it apply to how much of the loan I spent? And the application has answered that in the way they calculate this. It applies to the amount of the loan that you spent. So moving on, eligible payroll costs. Now that's the first thing I said you're going to need to figure and add into your non-eligible payroll costs. So the big difference here is now we're looking at a 24-week covered period, but it doesn't change your loan amount. So that's where some of the questions are created. So one of the new pieces of guidance under the application and the interim final rules is that before we believe that the time that you had to spend your PPP started when you got the distribution and ran for 8 weeks, now 24 weeks. There was created an alternative covered period because the SBA and Treasury recognized that everybody's payroll period doesn't necessarily match up well with that 8 weeks. So what they're saying is if your payroll period is biweekly or more frequent, then you can choose an alternative covered period. And that alternative covered period will start after your distribution date, when your next payroll period begins, and then run 24 weeks from there. I will tell you what to be careful of on the application. Once you choose the alternative covered period or the covered period, you have to use that consistently throughout for several different calculations. But what you need to be careful of, there are some calculations where you can use covered or alternative. There are some calculations where you can only use covered. So you need to be careful in reading the instructions to make sure that you're using the right period. The other thing that was new in the guidance is people had wondered, which payroll can I count? Is it only the ones that I paid during that 8 weeks or 24 weeks? And actually they have clarified that and includes payroll costs that were either paid or incurred during that period of time. And then I'm not gonna go through all these, the cash compensation, health insurance, retirement plans. This is mostly for people who have employees. I'm gonna go to the next slide. We're gonna talk about independent contractors and self-employed, but it's basically the definition that we've been talking about the whole time with the PPP. The only real change here is they've clarified that in the cash compensation, you can include hazard pay and bonuses. And you see here what's not included. You can't include leave covered by the Family First Corona Response Act. And as we've talked about for a long time, cash compensation it's going to be capped at $100,000. So moving on to owner employees, independent contractors. The way that you're going to calculate the amount of money essentially that you can pay yourself for payroll or for compensation during the 8 weeks and now the 24 weeks, it is essentially, it is capped by the lesser of 850 seconds. And they do that because they're taking your compensation for 2019, dividing it by 52, so you get a weekly, then multiplying it by 8 because you can only take 8 weeks of it, or $15,385 per individual. The reason for the $15,835 is the cap at $100,000, because once you cap your compensation at $100,000, once you do that calculation of 850 seconds, it comes out to $15,385. So essentially,
if I could ask you a question on the Rebecca,
sure,
to make sure. So it's based on 8 weeks, even though you've got 24 weeks to spend the payroll.
And that's an excellent question, Dan, because that is one of the things that's going to need to be clarified. But if you think about it, the way your if you're an independent contractor, self-employed, the way your PPP loan was figured was you looked at your 1040 Schedule C, line 31, which is your compensation, your net income for the year of 2019. You divided that by 12 to get your average monthly, and then you multiplied it by 2.5. So you got 2.5 months. So your amount of PPP loan amount hasn't changed. And that loan amount is just a little over 8 weeks of your compensation. So I cannot imagine that they're going to allow you to take 24 months of your compensation. I think what they're going to do is they're going to say you can still only take 8 weeks of your compensation, but you can spread that out over a 24-week period as you pay yourself.
Got it.
Now,
Thank you.
sure. One important difference, another important difference with respect to Schedule C filers and general partners is, you know, when you have employees, or even if you're an owner employee, the amount of healthcare and retirement contributions that are paid by the employer on your behalf, you can count in cash in payroll. But if you're a Schedule C filer or a general partner, you can't count what you pay for retirement or health insurance. And their theory that they have in their interim final rule about that is that those payments come out of your compensation. So you're not allowed to count that. So moving on, a lot of the eligible non-payroll costs are the same as we've been discussing. It's mortgage, interest, rent, utilities. Two big differences. Same as with the amount of payroll costs, it includes those are paid and those that are incurred during the covered period. So that is helpful in calculating, and also can get you, you know, at the end of your period, some amount that you haven't paid yet, assuming you pay it on time. The other big differences that came out in the application and were confirmed in the interim final rule are, we assumed with respect to mortgage interest, that was only interest on mortgages on real property. Also, that on rent, that was only rent on real property. What the application and the interim final rule changed was, they said it's on real or personal property. So for example, if you're a business who is purchasing a car and you're paying interest on those car payments, that interest you can count as part of your forgivable amount under the PPP. Or if you're renting a car, you can count the rent on that car. So that's one big change that came out recently. Okay, so this is where it gets a little more complicated. So I'm going to, I have given you all the different periods in here, and you can see them once it gets up on the EmpowerU website. In general, the FTE equivalent reduction reduces your forgiveness amount essentially by the same percentage that you have reduced your full-time employees. So now you're gonna have to figure out what your full-time employee equivalent is, and they base that on a 40-hour week. So for anyone who's 40 hours, they count as a full-time employee. If you have part-time employees, you can either create a percentage based on how much they work, or you could just give them all 50%. And then you're gonna have to calculate this for each employee, but then you take an average. So essentially, you have to select a reference period, and they've told you what you can choose from, and I have it up here. You take that reference period, you're gonna compare it to your covered period and your alternative covered period, whichever one you have chosen. And then if there's a reduction in the full-time employee equivalent, you're gonna have to reduce your loan forgiveness proportionally. And I think probably the thing that helps most with this is the example. So say during the reference period, you had 10 average full-time employees, but during the covered period, you only had 8. Well, 8 is 80% of 10. So you reduced it by 20%, which means essentially you're gonna have to reduce your forgiveness amount by 20%.
So Rebecca,
yes.
not to get in the weeds too much, but so are they gonna ask you to like list, like on a spreadsheet, every employee from that period, and then are you going to have to list every employee? Are you going to have to go into that much depth?
Yes, because so on the application, and I can explain to everyone where to find the application when we get to that part, you will see that there are tables, and you're going to have to fill out those tables for each employee. And it's for every employee that in 2019, there was no pay period in which they earned essentially the proportional part of $100,000. So essentially, if in no pay period, if you multiplied it times 12, you would have earned over $100,000. You're going to look at that employee. And you're also going to look at new employees for 2020. And there are different calculations that they have you do for each employee. For purposes of the reduction having to do with full-time employees, you're going to then take averages of those. But when we get to the reduction for salary and wages, you're actually going to reduce by the actual amounts that each employee was reduced. So yeah, you have to, and that's why I'm saying I really hope that they do make this less complicated, because at this point it is pretty complicated.
That's tough.
Yeah. So there are some safe harbors. Essentially, if, and the congressman talked about this, that the deadline for the safe harbor has been extended, which is terrific, because essentially if you reduced your full-time employee equivalent between February 15th and April 26th, but then you hired everybody back and you have the same full-time employee equivalent by December 31st, and you compare that against February 15th and how many you had at that point, you meet the safe harbor. So then the question is, well, what if someone quit, or what if someone got fired, or what if I offered them their job back and they wouldn't take it? And there are exceptions for those as well. Essentially, if you offered someone a job back at the same level of hours, and you can document that, and it was rejected, and you let the unemployment folks know, then that person is not going to count against you. Same if you had to fire someone for cause, or if they voluntarily resigned, or if they voluntarily received a reduction in hours, that's not going to count against you either.
That's a good that's a good one to know, because so many of employees have kind of played games with the $600 thing.
Yes. Yes. Okay, moving on to the wage salary reduction. And this is the one you're going to do a calculation employee by employee. And when I was explaining which employees you look at on the tables, they're listed in the sub bullet points right here under the detail. Essentially, for purposes of the wage and salary, for any employee where you reduced their wages or salary by more than 25% when comparing the reference period to your covered period, you're going to have to reduce your PPP accordingly. So, and this is another one where there's going to be a question about the 8 weeks or the 24 weeks, because I will give you the example. The example is, so, and it's down here, if you have someone who during the reference period was making $1,000 a week, and then during the covered period they were making $700 a week, obviously that's $300 less, but 25% of 1,000 is 250. So the first 250 doesn't count against you, but the next 50 does. But you have to multiply that times 8 weeks. So your full reduction that you have to take off your loan forgiveness for that one employee would be $400. I don't think that, I can't imagine they're going to make you multiply that by 24 for the same reason. The amount of loan that you got is the same, even though they've made it longer, the period of time that you can spend it. So I'm assuming that it will still just be the 8 weeks that you have to multiply it by. But again, they need to come out with a new application. There's a safe harbor here too, which is very similar. If you reduced wages and salaries between February 15th and April 26th, but you restore them by December 31st, then you fall within the safe harbor and you won't have to reduce your forgiveness amount. Also, in the interim final rule, they made it clear that they don't want to doubly penalize borrowers. So any reduction in your wage and salary that is based only because there was a reduction in hours is not going to count against you. So for example, if you have an employee and you cut their hours 50%, obviously they're making less money. But if you're paying them the same wage at their 50% hours as you were at their 100% hours, that's not going to count against you. All right, so this is what I said when I was going to show you how the lesser of the three amounts works. This is actually the bottom of the first form that you're going to have to turn in to your lender. So once you take your payroll cost and you add them to your eligible non-payroll cost, you subtract the actual dollar amount for your wage salary reduction, and then you multiply it by a formula that you figured out for your full-time employee reduction. That's going to be what is shown here on your modified total. That's what that's going to be. You're going to compare that to your PPP loan amount, and then you're going to take just your payroll cost. It says you're going to divide that by 0.75. That's going to change, I'm assuming, to 0.6. And so that's how they make sure you spend at least 60% on payroll. You look at those three numbers on line 8, 9, and 10, and your forgiveness amount is going to be the lesser of the three.
Got it.
Okay, so, and I know the congressman already talked about this, so I don't think that I need to go through it, the process of applying. One of the challenges is they haven't said when you have to apply. I've read that if you don't apply within 10 months, that could be problematic. I also read in, one of our clients who sent us our loan documents, they said you had to apply within 60 days of getting your loan. And I can't imagine that that's going to be true given that you have a safe harbor that doesn't end until December 31st. So there's going to have to be some additional guidance on when you need to file your form. And the banks may be able to be helpful on that. The other thing that the SBA has said is, the process where the lender determines if they think that you deserve the forgiveness and they recommend it to the SBA, then the SBA pays them money and then they forgive your loan. That is true if the SBA hasn't already reviewed your loan before the lender makes its decision. There are some cases where the SBA may just review your loan themselves, and they're going to issue more guidance on that. The document that you see here on the right, this is the list of all the documents that you either have to turn in that are optional to turn in or that you have to keep even though you don't turn them in. So it would be great if they could shorten that list, and I hope that legislation passes. All of your documentation you have to keep for 6 years. All right, so this is, and I know I rushed through it, and I'm happy to answer questions. And I know there are probably a lot of questions, and it's one of the reasons that Chris mentioned that we launched our small business solution groups, because we realized that, during this time, people are facing a lot of new issues, not only the PPP, but questions about downsizing their business, or questions about maybe ways to operate more efficiently or operate with people, working from home. And so we're offering both a legal perspective and a business perspective. Jane, who you see in the photo with me, she is not an attorney, but she has a business before she joined Finney Law Firm, where she was COO for small businesses. So she has that business operational background as well. And so the last slide is just our contact information, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have.
We've got a bunch of them.
Okay.
One question, you mentioned safe harbor many times. What does safe harbor, who makes something safe harbor?
So the regulations that have been coming out are from the SBA and the Treasury. So the safe harbors can come one of three ways. They can either come in, through legislation, as we've seen. They can come in the SBA and Treasury regulations that are coming out that they call interim final rules. And those are the real ways that are, legal. That's it. But there have also been, there's a document that the SBA has issued that's called the frequently asked questions. There's been a lot of guidance there, but it really doesn't have the force of law, but people have been treating it as if it does. So yeah, those are the ways that we're getting guidance. And there's a website, just so you know, the U.S. Treasury has a terrific website that lists all of the guidance that's been given. And if you Google essentially U.S. Treasury COVID-19 and small business assistance, it will come up for you. That is also where you can find the application. It is, the link to the application is in my PowerPoint, but it's a very long link. That's an easier way to get there. It's on that page.
Let's get into it. Here's the first question. Our company has had several employees leave voluntarily. We've hired some new employees. One as recently as last week, and we've rehired somebody who retired 3 years ago. We have another employee who started working for us in the fall of 2019. What are the ramifications of all these employee moves on the forgiveness of the PPP loan?
Well, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to list, all the employees during the reference period, all the employees that you have now during the covered period. And it doesn't matter if they're the same employees. What they're going to look at is, are they full-time employees and are they part-time employees? Essentially, if they're a full-time employee, you're going to assign them a 1. If they're a part-time employee, you're going to assign them a percentage. You're going to assign them a 0.5. And then you're going to do a calculation to see the percentage by which there was a reduction in your full-time equivalent. But as I said, there are those exceptions where, if people voluntarily left, that's not going to count against you. If you had to fire someone, it's not going to count against you. If you had to lay people off, but you offered their job back and they wouldn't take it and you have the right documentation, that's not going to count against you.
So the message there is that any of those kind of personnel decisions, you better start keeping track in a file of what you're going to need to prove that you did that or that.
Absolutely.
Happened. Okay,
yeah.
Good question. I got PPP money.
Dan, you cut out, or maybe that's my computer. Chris, you're on mute.
Jay, it looks like Dan has frozen in time. Can you unfreeze him? Or Dan, you might want to refresh or something.
He's having an internet problem. Let's see what we.
Rebecca, while we're waiting, do you want to talk about that question that I know we don't have an answer to, but just tell everybody we don't, which is the deductibility question?
Sure. Normally,
Well,
when
let me frame the question first. So Congress, when they passed the law, put a provision in that the PPP was not taxable. Well, that meant to me that, you know, the real value of, let's say, $100,000 of PPP is really more like $130,000 because you don't have to pay tax on it. But then later on, the IRS came out with a reg that said it's not taxable, but the expenses that come out of it are also not deductible, which really means the same thing. You have to, it doesn't change the tax. So because it reduces your deductibility of other expenses in your company because you're paying them out of the PPP. There's been legislation on that, but anyway, go ahead. How did that get resolved? So what Congress gave, the IRS took it away, and then.
Yeah. So what the IRS did is in accordance with tax law generally. Generally under tax law, if you have a loan that's forgiven, that counts as income to you. Now, Congress said in the CARES Act, this is not going to count as income to you. So they said, okay, it's not going to count as income to you when you forgive the loan. But there's also provision in tax law that says if you have a loan that's forgiven and it doesn't count as income, any of the expenses that made that forgivable are not going to be deductible. So it's essentially the same thing as Chris said. And that's the way the IRS keeps people from getting double tax benefits. The challenge is in this case, when Congress said, we don't want you to be taxed, we believe they actually meant we don't want you to be taxed. And so the IRS at this point, the last one I researched today, I could see on it was on May 18th, there had been something introduced both in the House and in the Senate, but nothing had really moved. So we're still waiting to see if that gets fixed.
Rebecca, you may remember the first PPP seminar, and I ended up having huge computer problems with that one with 350 people on the line. So it looks like Dan has the same hiccup this time.
Hey, can you all hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Hang on, I need to turn the speaker off. Okay, I apologize. I had to turn the speaker off to avoid echo. Dan, it appears his internet cut out. That's why it was frozen. So I assume he's attempting to reconnect. Let me go ahead and ask a few of the questions that I'm looking at in the live Q&A feed. First question is, I've been approved for an EIDL loan. I don't need the funds right now, but I'm concerned about the future. If I accept the loan and just keep the money in a separate account, would I be able to just give the money back if I don't need it in the future? Is there a chance it will be a forgivable loan?
The EIDL, when you first apply, you can get up to $10,000 in a grant. And that, you didn't fill out loan paperwork for that. If you applied, they just deposited it in your bank account. And that you don't have to pay back, but it does count against your PPP forgiveness. If they actually issued you a real loan and you figured out and you had to fill out loan documents and you had to sign loan documents, that loan is going to be governed by that loan document. So I'd recommend that you look at it. But no, that loan is not going to be forgivable.
Okay, another question.
Unless the law changes, let me put it that way.
Okay. Okay, another question. We received our PPP loan in the middle of May. Do the new rules apply to loans that were administered before the most recent bill was passed? They want to say thanks for the help.
Yes, everything that I've read indicates that it applies to everybody. I mean, unfortunately, some people may have already spent all their funds, you know, during those 8 weeks, but yes, the 60%, for example, should apply.
Okay, Dan, are you reconnected?
I am, but I'm on my cell phone, so I'm having trouble with the question. So Jay, could you ask the questions? And sorry about missing you guys.
I will continue with some of the questions in the feed. After forgiveness, will the expenses covered by the PPP be deductible from taxable income?
That's what we just discussed. There's not an answer to that question yet. So I think maybe that question was submitted prior to our discussion of that.
Yeah, it was. There were several questions that came in early.
You were probably dealing with the technical difficulty while we were talking about that.
Okay, Rebecca, does the extension from 8 weeks to 24 weeks to use PPP funds apply to all PPP small loans, or does it only apply to loans made June 5th and after?
Oh, it should apply to all loans. Although, as we discussed, we're going to need additional guidance on that because it's not going to change. For example, the cap on what self-employed can pay themselves is probably not going to change despite the 8 weeks changing to 24. You just have longer to spend your funds.
Rebecca, I've got an interesting one. This person said they had 4 fast food restaurants. They've received PPPs for each and have EIDL loans pending for each. And they're on track to expend the equivalent amount of payroll with the 25% allowance for rents and utilities. The person goes on to say that one of their bankers cautioned them about the use of EIDL loan funds that may directly impact a PPP loan. How can this person get the maximum forgiveness for his PPPs and still receive and use the EIDL loan funds?
And so, Dan, you may have been cut off when we talked about this just a minute ago, but the grant, the upfront grant for the EIDL absolutely counts against your PPP forgiveness dollar for dollar. There had been some guidance with respect to the EIDL loan, but only prior to the beginning of April. There hasn't been any guidance about if you got an EIDL loan after April. What they essentially had said was if you got it before April and then you got PPP funds, you had to refinance your EIDL with your PPP funds. They haven't said anything about that at this point. So that's one of those unanswered questions. I will tell you that the guidance though, and what everyone seems to, there's really not much disagreement on this. If you get and what I just said with respect to the EIDL loan and even the guidance they gave, it's if you got your EIDL for payroll, mortgage, interest, or rent. However, if you got your EIDL loan for something completely separate, something that is not covered by your PPP, so not payroll, not rent, not mortgage, not utilities, then you should be able to use the EIDL without it impacting your PPP forgiveness.
Okay.
I've got another question. A person emailed us and said, as a realtor, with myself being the only employee, is there any special documentation that I need to provide for the PPP loan forgiveness?
Yeah, the most important thing that you're going to need to apply, you're going to need to have your 1040 Schedule C, because you have to have line 31 to calculate it. And what the rules say is if you haven't done your taxes yet and you haven't filled them out and submitted them, you're going to have to fill them out. The rules don't say you have to submit them. They just say you have to fill it out to get to that line 31, because that's where the calculation comes from. Now, your bank may make you, and then you're going to have to back up that amount that you have on your taxes by either with a 1099 or through other documents.
Hey, Dan, do you have anything now? Hey, Rebecca, we have Dan, you are muted, I think. Okay, we'll let Dan get his sound working. And Rebecca, we have a question here.
Okay.
As a single employee, sole proprietor, LLC, instead of spending 60% on payroll, can I spend 100% on payroll and meet the requirements of PPP for forgiveness?
If your LLC, well, it's really going to be the same either way. If your LLC is treated as a partnership, then you're going to be reporting as a partner. If your LLC is just treated as a sole proprietorship and your taxes flow through on your individual income tax, then, but it should be the same either way. You can't use 100%. The amount that you can pay yourself is capped at 850 seconds, essentially, of your compensation from 2019. And that's on one of the slides that I had there. In addition, the amount that you can, there was guidance that came out several weeks ago saying that, I think it was, around the 14th of April, it came out saying, if you're self-employed, then also the amount that you can spend on mortgage, interest, rent, and utilities has to have been reported on your 2019 taxes. And that was in an interim final rule. When they did the application, that is not in there. So I'm assuming that still applies, but there's definitely a little conflict right there.
Okay. Another question: for purposes of the safe harbor requirements, is it safe to assume that the payroll, which includes 12/31/20, is very important for demonstrating a return to pre-COVID wages and FTEs?
Can you ask that again?
Yeah, the question is worded, for purposes of the safe harbor requirements, do we need to assume that the payroll, basically the last payroll of the year, the one that includes 12/31, is very important for demonstrating a return to pre-COVID wages and full-time employees?
Yeah, you're going to have to look at, if you reduced your either compensation or your full-time employees equivalent, the date that you're going to look at, the latest date, let's put it this way, you can look at to measure whether you got back up to the levels from February 15th is December 31st. So absolutely that period is going to be important.
For business, when you distinguish between full-time and part-time, are you able to include as part-time people that do still receive a 1099?
No, independent
That
contractor.
would be basically a contract, right?
Right, independent, the regulations have made it clear that employers can't count independent contractors as employees for purposes of the PPP. Independent contractors have to apply themselves for the PPP.
Okay, we have some challenging ones here. Many small businesses are employee-owned. Are you able to comment on a scenario where all the employees are also owners and receive 1065 K1 income instead of W-2s? It seems like the reduction calculation will compare 0 employed last year to 0 during the covered period when we actually increase the numbers of employee owners.
They're filing a K1. Is it a partnership?
It's basically, yeah, I guess it must be a partnership because they say they file, the K1. So they basically,
Rebecca, I think what they're doing is they're taking all of their profits out as distributions rather than wages.
That's what
So they're essentially 1099ing themselves. I think they each have to maybe apply individual. I don't know what you
If they're filing as if it's a K1, which my understanding is a partnership return, then they would be applying and the rules. But that's something we would have to research. My understanding, partners are treated a certain way, and they're the ones who generally file on the Schedule K. So yeah, that is a complicated question. But in general, self-employed folks are treated differently than partners. And there was a slide on the forgiveness and what could be counted for partners. So it's a question of how are they on their taxes? How are they counting themselves? Are they counting themselves as what kind of business owner are they counting themselves in when they do their taxes?
Right.
It sounds like that's probably a partner.
Question just came in, Rebecca, that said, explain transportation. I have a small transportation company. My question is, fuel included?
That's an excellent question, and one that I researched today because the Treasury and SBA have given no guidance on what transportation is, and everything else listed as utilities is pretty self-explanatory. And so what people are surmising is that means costs for fuel or mileage or, for your car that normally can be deductible, but there hasn't been guidance on it yet.
Jay, any other questions there? Let's maybe take one or two more and then we'll call it a night.
Okay. If we're self-employed and owners of the company and use the PPP loan 100% for payroll, is the loan 100% forgivable? There was no wage reduction as we maximized the loan request per our 2019 earnings.
Yeah, and it depends on if If you are an owner, self-employed owner of a business that also has employees, the answer to this is different than if you are a self-employed owner of a business and you're the only employee. Essentially, whether you are a owner employee, if you're an owner employee and it's just you, you're going to have to cap it at 850 seconds of your compensation from 2019. If you have employees, the calculation is going to be you capped at 850 seconds or the 15,000 amount we talked about, plus the calculation from the slide before that on each employee.
Okay, one more here. This is interesting. As an independent realtor, I received a PPP loan. What is the framework to get the loan forgiven since I did not lay myself off? And the bank stated that I have to turn in the required paperwork by July 8th. Does the 24-week extension change that date?
Are they saying they have to you have to turn in the forgiveness paperwork by then? I assume is what they're saying.
That is what it sounded like, yes.
Okay. I would say that I would work with your bank on when they want it and ask the bank that question, because of the changes in the safe harbor, you would think that that would be different. Though if you're self-employed and you're the only person, you also, if your 8-week period is over and you've spent all your money, maybe you can give them the documents. But that's one of those things where there's really not an answer at this point because the law just changed. The guidance hasn't matched the law yet, and banks are trying to catch up.
Okay, Dan, do you have any more questions on your end?
I guess I just want to kind of get a sense from Rebecca that you kind of feel like we're going to have till like around December to get this paperwork done, which sounds terrible, really. Sorry.
I think it's going to depend upon your bank. If you are not having an issue with the safe harbor, your banks may want to get it done beforehand so they don't end up having to process everything on December 31st. If you are self-employed and you have no employees, there's no reason to wait until December 31st because those safe harbors are not going to matter to you with respect to reduction for compensation and full-time employees. So, but if you are in a situation where you have reduced your employee count or your wage and salary amount and you need to take full advantage of that safe harbor, then yeah, I mean, it sounds like you will have, although guidance hasn't been issued. Sorry, I keep saying that because the law just changed. It sounds like, yes, you'll have to December 31st to do it. Hopefully.
Do you have any
That's what would make sense anyway.
Do you have any kind of summary conclusions, Rebecca, you want to share with people before we end tonight's session?
So I would say the summary conclusions are that I think it's terrific that Congress has loosened up the requirements. And so even though I say that it's created some questions, I think it still is a good thing because I think there are a lot of people who now may feel more comfortable taking advantage of the Paycheck Protection Program and getting some funds to help out their businesses. I also think that even though it is complex, it's not impossible. It's something that, you know, people can do on their own. If you pull down the application and you go through it, they do it step by step, and if they don't make it less complicated. But I was very happy to hear that they're talking about making it less complicated, especially for those with smaller loans.
Chris Finney, do you have any comments you'd like to make?
The only other thing I wanted to say that I didn't on the introduction is we have an active blog on our website, FinneyLawFirm.com, and Rebecca writes actively in that updates on EIDL and PPP and as well as other topics, and then we have other attorneys that do as well. I would also solicit from anybody on the call your email address. Just email me at chris@FinneyLawFirm.com, CHRIS at Finney, FINNEY, lawfirm.com, and we'll add you to our newsletter list. Once a month, we send out a newsletter with small business tips, and I'm sure Rebecca and Jane will be writing extensively for the new Small Business Solutions Group as well. And we really want to be a resource. I have kind of found, again, a calling to help small businesses and property owners with this PPP. We did this, Dan, you may remember a couple of years ago with the property tax valuation during the recession, and it just provided such great value to business owners. It was a joy to me to do it. First of all, we were able to pay a lot of bills for the Finney Law Firm, but beyond that, to be able to help people in a time of distress, there was a little silver lining to the cloud and help people get through those tough times. And it was really rewarding for me to do that. And I think that that's the heart, Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, of what you're trying to do with the Small Business Solutions Group is to help people to maximize value within their companies, cut costs, and increase revenue, but also to find practical solutions to problems that may be tough nuts to crack. And I'm just so thrilled to have Rebecca and Jane to do that and to make their resources available to people. And Dan, once again, I want to thank you for making this forum available for 10 solid years. You look just as young as the day you started.
Oh, there's a few gray hairs there. Like
Maybe
tonight,
a little more
like tonight when my power went out. But so much appreciation, Chris and Rebecca, for you doing this. And a couple of things I just want to share. And thanks to producer Jay for standing in when I blacked out there. Tomorrow, the video of this class will be live on empoweruohio.org, as will Rebecca's PowerPoint. So please don't hesitate to go to it. And on the last page of Rebecca's PowerPoint is her contact information, as well as Chris Finney's contact information. I know that they're serious, that they would love to have you contact them if you have a further question about PPP. Hey, this is hard stuff, guys. It really, really is. And we want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. We hope you'll consider seeing us Thursday night for a really interesting session on COVID-19 from Mike Wilson and Dr. Rob Bullis. So with that in mind.
Dan, can I say one thing on that just real quick?
Yeah.
We had our trial up in Erie County yesterday in Sandusky to try to get open the water park up there against Dr. Acton. And Mike Wilson was just a huge resource. He's part of that program as well. Is that right?
Mike Wilson will be putting on the first half of the program on.
The man is, he always has been inspiring with his activism and his, it takes people that believe beyond themselves to make our community better. You're one of those people. Obviously, Rebecca is one of those people. But Mike is just an amazing, and Dr. Bullis is too, but Mike was a huge resource for me the last 5 days getting ready for this hearing and pulling that off. And he has the goods, as it were, against Dr. Acton and all the bullshit that's coming out of. So am I allowed to say that on EmpowerU, Dan? Oh, all the nonsense that's coming out of Columbus on this thing. So
listen, for those of you who are going to join us Thursday night, I just warn you, you're going to have to put your thinking caps on, because this will be something you're really going to have to think about. Some of Mike's thoughts on this whole subject. Good to hear that he helped you. Once again, everyone, we thank you so much for joining us tonight at EmpowerU. We wish you all a great night. Thank you.